The afternoon sun shone brightly over Brooksville, a small town where everybody seemed to know each other. Inside Miles & Co. car dealership. The glass doors opened with a soft chime, and an elderly man stepped inside. His name was Harold Johnson, 73 years old. Tall but slightly bent from years of hard work, he wore a neat brown coat, polished shoes, and carried a wooden cane in his right hand. There was a calm dignity in the way he walked. Most people who saw him could tell he was a man who had faced life's storms and still stood strong. Harold had been saving for months to buy a used car for his granddaughter, Lila. She had just graduated and needed a way to travel to her new job. Harold wanted it to be a surprise, something that would make her smile. He stepped up to the front desk, where a young salesman, Josh, was leaning on the counter, scrolling through his phone. "Good afternoon, son," Harold said softly. "I'm looking for the 2014 sedan you have listed outside." Josh didn't look up at first. When he finally did, his eyes scanned Harold from head to toe. The corners of his mouth twitched into a smirk. "You sure you're in the right place, old man?" "This isn't a charity shop," he said with a short laugh. Harold stayed calm, his voice steady. "I'm in the right place. I came to buy a car." Josh chuckled and shook his head. "Do you even know how much that car costs? People like you don't usually walk in here ready to buy." Several customers glanced over at the sound of his voice, sensing something wasn't right. Harold straightened his shoulders, his eyes locking with Josh's. "I know exactly how much it costs. Now, can I see it?" Josh's smirk faded slightly, replaced by irritation. Instead of answering, he walked around the counter and stood in front of Harold. "Listen, old man," he said, lowering his voice but still loud enough for others too. "Here, you're wasting my time. Why don't you go look somewhere cheaper?" The air inside the showroom grew tense. A young woman sitting in the waiting area, Emily, had been watching closely. Her phone was in her hand, and she quietly started recording. Harold took a slow breath. "I'm not wasting anyone's time. I came here for a reason," he said. Josh suddenly stepped closer, his face twisted in annoyance. And then, without warning, he slapped Harold hard across the face. The sound of the slap echoed through the dealership. Gasps filled the room. Harold stumbled back a step, his cane nearly slipping from his hand. For a brief moment, he just stood there, his cheek stinging, his eyes filled not with anger, but with quiet sadness. Emily's heart pounded. She couldn't believe what she had just seen. Several other customers froze, unsure whether to speak up. Josh stepped back, looking almost proud of himself. "Now, leave before I have security." "Escort you out," he said coldly. Harold slowly reached for his cane. Adjusting his coat, his voice was soft but steady. "You've made a mistake, son," he said. Then he turned and walked toward the door. Not a single word of anger escaped his lips. Emily felt something deep in her chest. She stood up quickly and followed him. Josh called out after them, "Yeah, that's right. Walk away." As the glass doors closed behind Harold, Emily caught up with him in the parking lot. "Sir, please, wait," she said, her voice trembling. Harold turned to face her, the red mark still visible on his cheek. "I recorded what happened," she said, holding up her phone. "You can take this to the police. He can't get away with this." Harold looked at her for a long moment, his eyes calm but unreadable. "Thank you, miss," he said quietly. But then, to her surprise, he shook his head. "No, not yet." Emily frowned. "Not yet. But he hit you." In front of everyone, Harold gave a small, tired smile. "Sometimes justice doesn't come the way people expect," he said. He tipped his hat politely and started walking away. Emily stood there, watching him disappear around the corner. She didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. The slap was just the first spark. What was coming next would shock the whole town. Emily sat in her small apartment later that night, her heart still pounding from what she had seen. The image of that salesman's hand striking the old man played in her mind again and again. She could still hear the sharp sound, still see the shocked look on Harold's face. Her phone was on. The table in front of her, the video paused at the exact moment of the slap. Every time she pressed play, anger boiled in her chest. Emily wasn't just any bystander. She had grown up in Brooksville, had worked in customer service for years, and she knew what it was like to be treated as less than just because of how you looked. That's why she couldn't just let this go. She knew she had proof-clear video. With sound and, the whole thing only lasted 30 seconds, but it was enough to show the truth. Her best friend, Rachel, came over to drop off some groceries. Emily wasted no time. "You have to see this," she said, pulling up the clip. Rachel's eyes widened. "Oh my God, Emily. He just hit him. In front of everyone." Emily nodded, and then acted like it was nothing. She said. Rachel shook her head in disbelief. "You need to post this. People have to see it." Emily hesitated. She knew once she put this online, there was no going back. The video would spread maybe to the local news, maybe even further, but she also worried. About Harold, would he want the attention? Would it make things worse for him? Her phone buzzed. It was a notification from a neighborhood Facebook group. She clicked it, and her jaw dropped. Someone else had already posted about the incident, describing what happened in detail but without. Video comments were piling up fast. "I was there. I saw it happen. This town has gone downhill. That dealership has always treated people badly." Emily knew this was her moment. She uploaded the video to her own profile with the caption, "This is how Miles & Co. treats their customers. This man is Harold Johnson, an elderly man who came to buy a car for his granddaughter. Watch what the salesman does." Within 10 minutes, it had over 100 shares. By midnight, it had crossed 1,000. People were tagging news stations, lawyers, and even the mayor. The next morning, Emily woke to a storm of messages. Her phone kept buzzing. Journalists wanted interviews. Community leaders wanted to organize protests. Even strangers from other towns were offering to help Harold. But one thing was missing. Harold himself. No one seemed to know where he was. Emily decided to find him. She remembered the direction he walked after leaving the dealership. So she drove down that way, checking coffee shops, the park, and small stores. Finally, she spotted him sitting alone on a bench by the riverside, feeding crumbs to a group of ducks. "Mr. Johnson." She called softly. He turned, his expression calm, but his eyes sharp. "Miss Emily," he said, with a small nod. She walked over and sat beside him. "I hope you're not upset, but I posted the video," she said, her voice low. He didn't seem angry. "I figured you might," he replied. "And now?" she asked. "The whole town is talking about it. People want justice for you." Harold tossed another piece of bread into the water. "Justice," he said slowly, almost tasting the word. "That's a tricky thing, Miss Emily. Sometimes justice is loud, and sometimes it's quiet." Emily frowned. "But he hit you. He humiliated you. Don't you want to see him punished?" Harold turned to look at her. "I've seen punishment before. It doesn't always change a man," he said. "But when a man loses something he thought he owned forever, that changes him." She didn't fully understand. "Are you saying you have a plan?" she asked. Harold's lips curled into the faintest smile. "Let's just say, the dealership and I have a history. And now, that history is about to end." Emily felt a chill down her spine. Whatever Harold was planning, it wasn't going to be small. She could sense he wasn't just a quiet old man. There was more to him, much more, by the time she left him that afternoon. Her curiosity had doubled. She had no idea that within 24 hours, the entire town would be standing outside that dealership's glass doors, and Harold Johnson would be walking right back inside, but this time not as a customer. The morning air in Brooksville was cool, the kind that carried a quiet promise of change. Emily couldn't shake Harold's words from the day before. The dealership and I have a history. What did he mean by that? She decided she needed answers, and the only person who could give them was Harold himself. She found him again at the small cafe near the river, sitting in his usual corner seat with a cup of black coffee. He noticed her the moment she walked in and gave a gentle nod. "You're persistent, Miss Emily," he said, with a faint smile. She sat down, leaning forward. "Mr. Johnson, yesterday you said the dealership and you had a history. What did you mean?" Harold took a slow sip of his coffee before speaking. It was 1974. He began, his voice steady but laced with a sadness that hadn't faded in decades. "I was 22, fresh back from serving in the Army. I had saved every penny from my service pay. My dream was simple, to buy my first car so I could drive to my new job and start my life. I walked into Miles & Co., same place, same name. But a different building back then." He paused, his gaze distant. "They looked at me like I didn't belong there. The salesman laughed when I told him what I could afford. When I insisted on seeing a car, he called the manager, and the manager? He said they didn't sell that kind of car to people like me." Emily felt her stomach twist. "You mean? Because you're black?" she asked quietly. Harold nodded once. "They didn't bother to hide it back then. I left that day. Without a car and without my pride," he leaned back, his eyes narrowing slightly, "but I didn't let it stop me. I worked hard, bought a car somewhere else, built my career. Years later, I opened my own auto repair shop, and wouldn't you know it, a lot of their customers started coming to me instead. I've been waiting a long time, Miss Emily, a very long time." Emily realized then that Harold's plan wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming something that had been stolen from him decades ago. She wanted to ask more, but Harold's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and smiled to himself. "Looks like the time has come," he said. Standing up and placing a few bills on the table for the coffee, Emily followed him outside. "Where are you going?" she asked. "To finish something I started 50 years ago." He replied. That afternoon, Brooksville was buzzing with news. The viral video had reached local TV stations. Reporters were camped outside the dealership, along with dozens of protesters holding signs. "Justice for Harold. Stop the hate. Fire Josh." Inside, the dealership was in chaos. The owner, Mr. Miles Jr., the son of the original founder, was pacing in his office. The viral video had tanked their reputation overnight. Customers were canceling orders, and sponsors were pulling out. In the middle of this storm, Harold arrived, walking in with his cane, his coat buttoned neatly. Every head turned as the old man stepped through the glass doors. Josh, the salesman who had slapped him, froze near the front desk. "What are you doing here?" Josh snapped, though his voice lacked the confidence it had before. Harold didn't answer him. Instead, he walked past, straight into the owner's office, ignoring the shocked gasps. Mr. Miles Jr. looked up. "Harold Johnson," he said, his tone uneasy. "I suppose you're here because of the incident." Harold shook his head slowly. "No, I'm here because the paperwork went through," he said, placing a thick folder on the desk. Mr. Miles frowned, flipping through the documents, his face going pale. This says that I now own this dealership," Harold finished for him, his voice calm. "I bought it, every last inch of it. You can check with the bank if you like." Emily, who had slipped in behind Harold without being noticed, covered her mouth in shock. This was what he meant by justice doesn't always come the way people expect. Mr. Miles sat back in his chair, speechless. Josh, standing in the doorway, went pale. You own it now," he stammered. Harold turned to him. "Yes, "And that means you work for me for the next 10 minutes," he said quietly. The room went silent except for the clicking of cameras from reporters who had followed them in. Harold's plan was no longer a mystery, and this was just the beginning. What he did next would change the dealership forever. The glass doors of Miles & Co. car dealership swung open with a heavy push. The sound echoed through the busy showroom, drawing everyone's attention. In walked Harold Johnson, but this time, it wasn't the quiet old man who had left with a stinging cheek. He was dressed in a crisp charcoal suit, polished shoes, and a deep blue tie. His cane clicked against the tiled floor, but there was strength in his stride. His calm eyes scanned the room like a man who belonged there. Every employee froze where they stood. Customers whispered to each other, some pulling out their phones. The protesters outside pressed their faces to the glass to see what was happening. The hum of conversations died down until all that could be heard was the low hum of the ceiling. Lights. Josh, the arrogant salesman, was leaning against the counter, pretending to type something into the computer. When he saw Harold, his smirk wavered. "What are you doing here?" Josh asked, his voice low but sharp. "I thought I told you to. You told me to leave." Harold interrupted calmly, "And I did. But today, I came back to stay." Josh scoffed. "You think you can just..." Before he could finish, the dealership's general manager, a man in a gray blazer, hurried over. "Mr. Johnson," the manager said nervously, "I didn't know you'd be here so soon." "That's because I didn't want you to," Harold replied, his voice polite but unshakable. He pulled a folded document from his suit pocket and handed it to the man. "Read it." Out loud, the manager's hands trembled slightly as he unfolded the paper. It was an official bank statement and deed transfer. His eyes widened as he read the first lines. This confirms that the ownership of Miles & Co. car dealership has been transferred to Harold Johnson." Gasps rippled through the showroom. Emily, who had followed Harold quietly, felt her heart pound in her chest. She could see the stunned looks on every face, employees, customers, even the reporters, who had rushed inside when they saw Harold arrive. Josh's voice cracked when he spoke. "This has to be some kind of joke," he said, stepping forward. You own this place now." "Yes," Harold said, his voice firm but calm, "and that means things are going to change. Starting with you." The cameras from the news crew clicked and flashed, catching every second. Josh swallowed hard, his arrogance melting into unease. "You can't just fire me." "Oh, I can," Harold replied, pulling a single white envelope from inside his coat and handing it to Josh. "Your employment here is terminated, effective immediately." Josh opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper with the reason written in bold: "Disrespect, assault, and conduct unbecoming of an employee." The room was so quiet you could hear the ticking of the wall clock. Josh's face turned red, his mouth opening and closing, but no words coming out. Finally, he turned and stormed toward the door, shoving past two reporters. Outside, the protesters cheered as he left. Harold didn't raise his voice, didn't gloat. He simply turned to the staff and said, "This dealership is no longer a place where people are judged by the color of their skin, their age, or their wallet." He glanced toward the front, where the glass doors let in the sunlight. "It's going to be a place where every customer is treated with respect." Emily stepped closer, speaking just loud enough for him to hear. "You really planned this, didn't you?" Harold gave her a small smile. "I had 50 years to plan it." Later that afternoon, the news broke across the state. Elderly man buys dealership after viral slap incident, fires salesman. On the spot. The story exploded on social media. Messages poured in from strangers across the country, praising Harold for his dignity and strength. Inside the dealership, the employees gathered for a short meeting. Some looked relieved, some curious, some even hopeful. Harold stood at the center, leaning lightly on his cane. "I won't run this place alone," he said. "Every one of you will have a voice here. But if you treat a customer with anything less than respect, you won't work here." The meeting ended with a quiet but firm agreement from the staff. Even the customers in the showroom clapped softly. For the first time in decades, Harold felt the heavy weight on his heart begin to lift. As the sun set, Harold stepped outside. Where Emily waited, the protesters were dispersing, some stopping to shake his hand or take a picture. Emily smiled. "You did it?" she said. Harold looked at the glowing orange horizon and nodded. "Yes," he replied, "but we're only halfway there," because Harold didn't just want justice. He wanted transformation, and what he was about to do next would touch the entire community. The next morning, the dealership looked different, not in its walls or windows, but in its atmosphere. The usual air of cold business had been replaced with a quiet tension, the kind that comes when everyone knows big changes are coming. And at the center of it all was Harold Johnson, cane in hand, moving through the showroom with calm authority. The employees were gathered in the meeting area, a small lounge with glass walls and leather chairs. Some sat stiffly, others leaned forward with curiosity. Harold stood at the front, his coat neatly buttoned, his eyes scanning each face. "I called you all here," Harold began, his voice deep but measured, "because yesterday something happened. In this dealership that should never happen anywhere. No one dared to interrupt. You all saw it. Or heard about it," he continued. "An employee treated a customer, me, with disrespect and even violence." Murmurs rose in the room. But Harold raised a hand. "I'm not here to dwell on that," he said. "I'm here to make sure it never happens again. Not to me, not to anyone." He pulled out a single sheet of paper and placed it on the small podium. "This," he said, "is the new customer code of respect." He read it aloud. "Line by line, every customer will be greeted with respect and patience. No assumptions will be made about a person's ability to buy. No one will be treated differently because of race, age, appearance, or income from this day forward." Harold said, his voice steady, "If anyone here violates this code, they will be dismissed immediately." No warnings. A few employees exchanged uneasy glances. One man in the back raised his hand. "Mr. Johnson, with all due respect, that sounds strict." What if Harold cut him off gently? "I've lived through what happens when rules aren't strict enough," he said, "and I will not watch this place turn into what it used to be." Emily was in the corner, quietly filming with Harold's permission. She wanted people to see this moment, the moment a business's culture shifted in real time. Then Harold turned his gaze toward the service department. A tall, heavy-set man named Carl stood there with crossed arms. Carl had worked at the dealership for 15 years and had a reputation for being short-tempered with customers. Harold stepped closer. "Carl," he said evenly, "you've had 3 written complaints in the past year for yelling at customers. That ends today." Carl shifted uncomfortably. "I was just doing my job," he muttered. Harold nodded slowly. "I'm giving you one chance. Not for you, but for the people who come through those doors. Show me you can change." The room was silent, the tension thick. Carl finally lowered his arms. "I can change," he said quietly. Harold looked around the room. "This dealership will be different," he said. "And if that means losing people who can't adapt, then so be it." Later that afternoon, Harold took a walk around the lot. Customers were starting to trickle in again, drawn by curiosity and the buzz from the viral video. A young mother with 2 children was looking at a small sedan. Harold approached with a warm smile, looking for something reliable. He asked. She hesitated, glancing around nervously. I heard about what happened here," she said. "I wasn't sure if I should come." Harold's smile didn't fade. "Then I'm glad you did," he said. "You'll be treated right here, I promise." Emily, standing nearby, noticed the woman relax instantly. It wasn't just the words, it was the way Harold said them. It was the quiet confidence of a man who meant what he said. But as the day went on, Harold faced his first real challenge. Two men in suits arrived, claiming to represent a concerned investor. They asked to speak to him in private, inside his office. They closed the door and sat across from him. One of them leaned forward. "Mr. Johnson, we're here to make you an offer. Sell us the dealership." Harold raised an eyebrow. "Sell it?" "I just bought it," he said. The man in the gray suit smiled thinly. "And you could make a profit immediately. Walk away with more money than you paid." Harold leaned on his cane and studied them. "Let me guess," he said slowly. "This offer is coming from someone who doesn't like the changes I'm making." Neither man answered, but the silence was enough. Harold stood. "You can tell whoever sent you that I didn't buy this place for money," he said. "I bought it for respect, and you can't put a price on that." The men left without another word. Emily, who had been waiting outside the office, hurried in. "What did they want?" she asked. Harold smiled faintly. "They wanted to buy my silence. But they're not getting it." That evening, Harold stood by the large glass windows. Watching the last of the customers leave, the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Emily stood beside him. "You're changing more than a dealership," she said softly. "You're changing people's minds." Harold's eyes stayed on the horizon. "That's the reckoning, Miss Emily," he said. "It's not about revenge. It's about making sure no one else has to live what I lived." But even as he spoke, he knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Some people wanted him to fail, and before long, they'd try harder than ever to make it happen. 2 weeks after Harold Johnson took over Miles & Co. car dealership, the changes were impossible to miss. The dull, lifeless showroom had been brightened with fresh paint, warm lighting, and photographs of smiling customers, not stock images, but real people. From the community, a banner hung above the main desk. Respect for all, service for all. It wasn't just decoration. Harold had made practical changes too. The pushy sales tactics were gone, replaced with honest conversations about prices and options for the first time. Customers felt they could walk in without fear of being judged. He had also introduced something no other dealership in Brooksville had ever done: a community day, once a month. The dealership would open its lot for free car safety checks, driving lessons for teens, and even a small barbecue for families. Emily was there every day now, helping Harold with social media. She posted pictures of customers driving away in their cars, videos of the free safety checks, and updates about the dealership's new policies. Each post gathered hundreds, sometimes thousands of likes. People were starting to see Miles & Co. as a symbol of change. But Harold's transformation plan went deeper than anyone expected. One morning, he called a meeting with his staff. "I'm raising your base salaries," he announced. Gasps filled the room. "And I'm adding bonuses for excellent customer service, not for the number of cars you sell, but for the number of customers who leave here satisfied." Some employees were shocked, others smiled, relieved that the endless pressure to push sales was gone. Carl, the service department's longtime employee who had been given a second chance, stepped forward after the meeting. "Mr. Johnson, I'll admit, I didn't think I'd like these changes. But I've had more happy customers in the last 2 weeks than I've had in the last 2 years. Harold gave a small nod. "That's the point, Carl. Happy customers come back outside." The dealership, the community, was responding. Families who had sworn never to shop there were returning. Word spread that Harold himself often greeted people at the door. A few even came just to shake his hand. One elderly woman hugged him, whispering, "My husband was treated badly here years ago." I wish he could see this. Emily caught that moment on video when she posted it online. It went viral within hours. Thousands of comments poured in. praising Harold not just for buying the dealership, but for healing old wounds. But not everyone was happy. One evening, Harold was in his office finishing paperwork when the phone rang. The voice on the other end was low and unfriendly. "You think you're some kind of hero, Johnson? You're ruining a business that's been in this town for 50 years. Harold stayed calm. "I'm not ruining it. I'm fixing it," he said. The caller hung up without another word. He didn't mention it to Emily or the staff, but deep down, he knew exactly who was behind it. Old business owners and investors who wanted the dealership to fail so they could take it back. The next morning, Harold arrived early to find a nasty surprise, spray-painted across the front glass doors. In big red letters were the words, "Sell and leave." Emily arrived minutes later, her eyes wide. Who would do this? She asked. Harold sighed. "Someone afraid of change," he said quietly. He called a glass repair company and had the doors cleaned before the first customers arrived. By noon, the showroom looked spotless again. But instead of hiding what happened, Emily posted a photo of the graffiti on the dealership's Facebook page. With the caption, "You can try to scare us, but respect always wins." The post exploded online. By the end of the day, customers were coming in just to show their support. Some buying cars they hadn't even planned to purchase. Later that week, Harold hosted the first official community day. The lot was filled with food stalls, music, and kids running around with balloons. Local mechanics volunteered to check tire pressure, oil levels, and brakes for free. Teenagers lined up for the driving lessons in the back lot. Harold moved from group to group, shaking hands, answering questions, and laughing with neighbors he'd known for decades. Emily stood near the entrance, watching with a smile. "This isn't just a dealership anymore," she said to herself. "It's a gathering place." At one point, a man in a gray suit stood at the edge of the crowd, watching silently. Emily recognized him, one of the investor representatives, who had tried to buy Harold out. But when she pointed him out, Harold simply smiled. "Let him watch," he said. "The best answer to people like him is success." By the end of the month, sales had doubled. But more important than the numbers were the faces, customers leaving with smiles, and employees standing taller, proud of the work they were doing. That night, after the last car left the lot, Harold locked the doors and stood in the quiet showroom. Emily joined him. "You've done it?" she said softly. Harold looked around, his hand resting lightly on his cane. "Not yet," he said. "There's one last thing I need to do for myself, and for this town." Emily tilted her head. "What's that?" Harold's eyes narrowed slightly, but his voice was calm. "It's time to face the man whose family started all this, and finish what began 50 years ago." The next morning, Harold Johnson dressed with deliberate care. He chose a dark navy suit, polished his shoes until they shone, and tied his best silk tie. Today was not about selling cars or greeting customers. Today was about closing a chapter that had been open for 50 long years. Emily waited outside the dealership, leaning against her car. When Harold stepped out, she could tell by his steady, focused walk that he had made up his mind. "Are you sure you want me to come?" she asked. Harold nodded. "You've been here for the whole story. Emily, you should be here for the ending." They drove across town to a tall glass building that looked nothing like the small, friendly businesses Harold had been building. On the top floor was the office of Miles Jr., the son of the man who had humiliated Harold all those years ago. The man who had once run the dealership before selling it off to cover his debts. And the man who, according to Harold's sources, had sent the investors to pressure him into selling. When they entered the office, Miles Jr. was standing by the window with his back turned. He was in his 60s now, with silver hair and an expensive watch. Without looking, he said, "I was wondering when you'd come." Harold stepped forward slowly. "I didn't come for a fight," he said. "I came to tell you something you should have heard from your father's mouth 50 years ago." Miles Jr. turned, his expression unreadable. "You bought my family's dealership," he said flatly. "You embarrassed my salesman in front of the whole town. I suppose you think you've won." Harold shook his head. "This isn't about winning or losing. It's about respect." Emily stood quietly by the door, recording the conversation with Harold's permission. She could feel the tension between the two men, years of unspoken history hanging in the air. Harold's voice was calm, but his eyes didn't waver. "When I was 22, I came into your dealership with money in my pocket and hope in my heart," he said. "Your father looked me in the eye and told me, without shame, that he didn't sell cars to people like me." Miles Jr. shifted uncomfortably. "That was a different time," he muttered. Harold's tone hardened just slightly. "A different time doesn't make it right." He took a step closer. "For 50 years, I carried that moment with me, every word, every look, every bit of humiliation. But I didn't let it break me. I worked, I built something, and now I've taken back what was denied to me." Miles Jr. leaned against his desk, his jaw tight. "So what now? You want me to apologize?" Harold shook his head. "No. An apology from you wouldn't mean much. To me," he said, "what matters is that you see what respect looks like. That you see a business where customers of all colors, all ages, all incomes, are treated with the same kindness." Emily could see the change in Harold's posture. He wasn't there for revenge. He was there to give closure, and he was doing it with dignity. Harold turned to leave, but paused at the door. He looked back at Miles Jr. "I'm not here to erase the past. I'm here to make sure no one else lives it." Then, with a calm nod, he walked out. Back at the dealership that afternoon, Harold stood in front of the staff and customers who had gathered for another community event. Emily was ready with her camera. Harold raised his voice just enough for everyone to hear. "I want you all to know something," he began. "This place used to be a symbol of exclusion. Now, it's going to be a symbol of welcome. And it will stay that way for as long as I'm here." Cheers and applause filled the room. Carl, the mechanic who had been given a second chance, stood in the back with tears in his eyes. The young mother who had once hesitated to enter the dealership came forward to shake Harold's hand, and Emily, watching through her lens, felt a swell of pride, not just for Harold's victory, but for the way he had achieved it. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Harold locked the doors and walked out into the cool night air. Emily caught up to him in the parking lot. "You finally closed that chapter," she said softly. Harold smiled, looking up at the stars. "Yes," he replied, "but the story isn't just mine anymore. It belongs to everyone who walks through those doors." He started toward his car, his cane tapping lightly against the pavement. In the distance, the lights from the dealership glowed warmly against the night. It was more than a building now. It was a promise kept, a wrong made right, and a reminder that dignity, once reclaimed, can never be taken away again. And for Harold Johnson, that was the last word.